What's up, family? This your girl, Empress Goddess, the Georgia Peach. Hope all is well. I guess y'all say I ain't been on today like I usually be on. Now I slowed down a little bit. Just chilling a little bit like a bit. Having some me time. Reflecting, contemplating. So anyway, we're gonna get in here with a little bit of this. This is Esoteric Tower. Your Visible Power. A manual of using mental energy.
Is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algie Pug. Your Invisible Power by Genevieve Berend. Section 0. Foreword. These pages have been written with purpose and hope that their suggestions may furnish you a key to open up the way to the attainment of your desires, and to explain that fear should be entirely banished from your effort to obtain possession of the things you desire. This presupposes, of course, that your desire for possession is based upon your aspiration for greater liberty. For example, you feel that the possession of more money, lands, or friends will make you happier, and your desire for possession of these things arises from a conviction that their possession will bring you liberty and happiness. In your effort to possess, you will discover that the thing you most and ultimately need is to be, always, not spasmodically, your best self. That self which understands that the mistakes of those you love are simply misunderstandings. Your feeling that greater possessions, no matter of what kind they may be, will of themselves bring you contentment or happiness is a misunderstanding. No person, place, or thing can give you happiness. They may give you cause for happiness and a feeling of contentment, but the joy of living comes from within. Therefore, it is here recommended, rather than otherwise, that you should make the effort to obtain the things which you feel will bring you joy, provided, as previously stated, that your desires are in accord with the joy of living. It is also desired in this volume to suggest the possibilities in store for all who make persistent effort to understand the law of visualization and make practical application of this knowledge on whatever plane he or she may be. The word effort, as here employed, is not intended to convey the idea of strain. All study and meditation should be without strain or tension. It has been my endeavour to show that by starting at the beginning of the creative action or the mental picture, certain corresponding results are sure to follow. While the laws of the universe cannot be altered, they can be made to work under specific conditions, thereby producing results for individual advancement which cannot be obtained under the spontaneous working of the law provided by nature. However far the suggestions I have given you of the possibilities in store for you through visualizing may carry you beyond your past experience, they nowhere break the continuity of the law of cause and effect. If, through the suggestions given here, anyone is brought to realize that their mind is a center through and in which all power there is in operation, simply waiting to be given direction in the one and only way through which it can take specific action, and this means reaction in concrete or physical form, then the mission to which this book is dedicated has been fulfilled. Try to remember that the picture you think, feel, and see is reflected into the universal mind, and by the natural law of reciprocal action must return to you in either spiritual or physical form. Knowledge of this law of reciprocal action between the individual and the universal mind opens to you free access to all you may wish to possess or to be. It must be steadfastly borne in mind that all this can only be true for the individual who recognizes that they derive their power to make an abiding mental picture from the all-originating universal spirit of life, God, and can be used constructively only so long as it is employed and retained in harmony with the nature of the spirit which originated it. To ensure this, there must be no inversion of the thought of the individual regarding their relationship to this universal originating spirit, which is that of a son or daughter, through which the parent mind acts and reacts. Thus conditioned, whatever you think and feel yourself to be, the creative spirit of life is bound to faithfully reproduce in a corresponding reaction. This is the great reason for picturing yourself and your affairs as you wish them to be as existing facts, though invisible to the physical eye, and live in your picture. An honest endeavour to do this, always recognising that your own mind is a projection of the originating spirit, will prove to you that the best there is yours in all your ways. End of foreword. Your Invisible Power by Genevieve Berend. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 1. Order of Visualization. The exercise of the visualizing faculty keeps your mind in order and attracts to you the things you need to make life more enjoyable in an orderly way. If you train yourself in practice of deliberately picturing your desire and carefully examining it, you will soon find that your thought and desires come and proceed in more orderly procession than ever before. Having reached a state of ordered mentality, you are no longer in a constant state of mental hurry. Hurry is fear, and consequently destructive. In other words, when your understanding grasps the power to visualize your heart's desire and hold it with your will, it attracts to you all things requisite to the fulfillment of that picture by the harmonious vibrations of the law of attraction. You realize that since order is heaven's first law, and visualization places things in their natural element, then it must be a heavenly thing to visualize. Everyone visualizes, whether they know it or not. Visualizing is the great secret of success. The conscious use of this great power attracts to you greatly multiplied resources, intensifies your wisdom, and enables you to make use of advantages which you formerly failed to recognize. We now fly through the air, not because anyone has been able to change the laws of nature, but because the inventor of the flying machine learned how to apply nature's laws, and by making orderly use of them, produced the desired result. So far as natural forces are concerned, nothing has changed since the beginning. There were no airplanes in the year one, because those of that generation could not conceive the idea as a practical working possibility. It has not yet been done, was the argument, and it cannot be done. Yet the laws and materials for practical flying machines existed then as now. Troward tells us that the great lesson he learned from the airplane and wireless telegraphy is the triumph of principle over precedent and the working of an idea to its logical conclusion in spite of accumulated testimony of all past experience. With such an example before you, can you not realize that still greater secrets may be disclosed? Also, that you hold the key within yourself with which to unlock the secret chamber that contains your heart's desire. All that is necessary in order that you may use this key and make your life exactly what you wish it to be is a careful inquiry into the unseen causes which stand back of every external and visible condition. Then bring these unseen causes into harmony with your conception, and you will find that you can make practical working realities of possibilities which at present seem but fantastic dreams. We all know that the balloon was the forefather of the airplane. In 1766, Henry Cavendish, an English nobleman, proved that hydrogen gas was 7 times lighter than atmospheric air. From that discovery, the balloon came into existence, and from the ordinary balloon, the dirigible, a cigar-shaped airship, was evolved. Study of aeronautics and the laws of aerial locomotion of birds and projectiles led to the belief that mechanism could be evolved by which heavier-than-air machines could be made to travel from place to place and remain in the air by the maintenance of great speed which would overcome by propulsive force the ordinary law of gravitation. Professor Langley of Washington, who developed much of the theory which others afterwards improved, was subjected to much derision when he sent a model airplane up, only to have it bury its nose in the muddy waters of the Potomac. But the Wright brothers, who experimented in the latter part of the 19th century, realized the possibility of traveling through the air in a machine that had no gas bag. They saw themselves enjoying this mode of transportation with great facility. It is said that one of the brothers would tell the other, when their varied experiments did not turn out as they expected, "It's all right, brother. I can see myself riding in that machine, and it travels easily and steadily." Those Wright brothers knew what they wanted and kept their pictures constantly before them. In visualized.
Why would someone make their teachings a secret? Because society turns to persecution of anything it does not agree with. As you begin to understand what other people don't, there can be a temptation to use that knowledge to manipulate others. What do important names in the history of humanity, such as Leonardo da Vinci, Paracelso, René Descartes, Isaac Newton, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and Eric Satie have in common? They were all members of the same order, the ancient and mystic Rosicrucian order, which is considered the oldest fraternity in the world, destined to studying, experimenting, and practicing the highest principles of nature, of the human being and the universe, having Pharaoh Akhenaton as the first traditional grandmaster of the order. Would that order be composed of the enlightened ones who found the Philosopher's Stone, or maybe a gathering of secret masters who rule the world, a conspiracy in order to dominate the planet? Who are, after all, the Rosicrucians? What do they want? What do they seek? What do they teach? Many are the vexed questions concerning life and destiny which man would seek to answer. Have I lived this life on earth before? Does this life continue after that which is called death? Are mind and thought independent of the human organism? Does man possess higher faculties than those he is in the habit of using day after day? And so, how can those faculties be unfolded? Let us first of all survey briefly the history of the Rosicrucian fraternity. The fraternity owes its origin to the archaic teachings of the Atlanteans who passed on their knowledge to the early Egyptians. By tradition, and in some instances by writings, the knowledge has been passed on to the present time. The fraternity bearing the name Rosicrucian was founded as such in Europe during the medieval ages, and its purpose was to teach the esoteric side of Christianity and, in addition, to promulgate Eastern mystery science and philosophy in a form adaptable to the minds of European people. The Rosicrucian organization wasn't related to any single authoritative figure, and it wasn't aligned with any particular form of control structure. There wasn't an institution for it. It was actually a very free and independent direction of modern initiation. During the centuries which have elapsed since the medieval age, a vast amount of knowledge has been accumulated. Furthermore, the accumulated knowledge has proved to be practicable. That which could not be applied to practice has been archived as mystery.
In the brain, in the cranium, there is the cerebrum. And in the cerebrum, and in particular the claustrum is sitting right there in the middle of the head, virtually. From the claustrum, there is a secretion, brain fluid. And this fluid is an oil. And in ancient times, this fluid was called, in Greek, it's called Christos. It's called the Christ. It's this beautiful fluid which comes from the cerebrum and pours down the spinal cord. It goes down the spinal cord and it reaches the sacral plexus, right next door to the sacrum, which are the 5 second bottommost fused vertebrae bones at the bottom of the spinal column. The bottommost portion of the spinal column is called the coccyx. Then just above that is the sacrum, 5 fused bones. So the sacral plexus is connected to the sacrum. And the fluid which comes from the cerebrum pours down the spinal cord and comes to the bottommost part of the spinal cord. Now, the claustrum is otherwise known as the holy claustrum, simply because of this beautiful oil, this Christos, that is produced and secreted. You see, the word secret comes from secretion, because this secretion is a secret. And the sacrum is the sacred part of the secret. as the secretion pours down the spinal cord and reaches the sacrum. This is the marvelous way in which our body has been designed. And the spinal cord is basically just an extension of the brain. It also does thinking. And you see, the holy claustrum is otherwise known as the Santa claustrum. You see, because this fluid is a sacred fluid. And this is where the story of Santa Claus bringing presents down the chimney comes from. It's a story of physiology. And the Bible is a beautiful manual of physiological regeneration. What happens with this fluid is that every month when the moon is in the sign where your sun was when you were born, every month there is a germ or a seed planted in the solar plexus, which is just above the sacral plexus. And that germ is the oil, the Christ, which is born in Bethlehem, because the the solar plexus is otherwise known as Bethlehem, where the seed, where the Christ is born. And that seed, that oil needs to return whence it came, in the midbrain. You see, as the oil ascends the spinal cord, the vibration of the oil of the Christ increases. And you see, first of all, the oil is differentiated in the pineal gland and the pituitary gland before it is sent down the spinal cord. And the pineal gland is the electric portion, and the pituitary gland is the magnetic portion. So the oil is differentiated and it is brought down the spinal cord via the Pingala and the Ida nerves. These are what is otherwise known as the Kundalini and the Kundabuffer. So it arrives at the sacral plexus and awaits for the germinating of the seed once a month, 12 times a year. And if we are able to transmute that seed and cause it to rise, as it rises in the spinal cord, it eventually reaches the medulla oblongata and the pons and the midbrain, and it crosses the vagus nerve, otherwise known as the pneumogastric nerve. It's a nerve which descends from the brain area, from the pineal and pituitary glands, respectively, and it feeds the lungs and the stomach. It's a network of nerves, and this network of nerves is called the tree of life. And you see, the ancients knew that this seed that is born in Bethlehem once a month is the Christ, and that if one were to abstain from sex during that period, that oil and seed would be saved, and it would rise, and it would burst through the heart chakra, through the throat chakra, and eventually the oil would arrive with its higher vibration, because you see at the bottom, the oil has a very low vibratory rate. Whereas with proper practices, meditation, breathing, good eating, and good peaceful behavior, one is able to raise that Christ, that oil, so that it crosses the vagus nerve at the top of the spinal column, the 33 vertebrae of the spinal column. You see, because the Christ is crucified at 33 years of age. When the oil arrives at the very, very top, there awaiting is the optic thalamus, an egg-shaped organ in the middle of the head. When it crosses this pneumogastric nerve, this is called the crucifixion. The oil is not killed and destroyed, but it is magnified 1,000-fold. And the oil then touches the optic thalamus, and for 2.5 days remains in a condition that is called dead, that is considered to be dead, and then reaches the pineal gland after 2.5 days and illuminates the optic thalamus and the pineal gland. The optic thalamus was known as the light of the world by the Egyptians and the Greeks because they knew their physiology and anatomy. And they knew that this precious oil, which descended from the claustrum, from the cerebrum, and was differentiated in the pineal and pituitary glands, and descended the spinal cord, they knew that it would ascend eventually, and that the enlightened portion of mankind were able to cause this Christ oil to ascend so that it would ascend to the optic thalamus and cause it to be lightened. What in turn happens is that millions of brain cells that were dormant are now awakened. And you see, there are practices and there are things that are very, very detrimental about this oil, or that are detrimental to this oil. For instance, overeating and alcohol and sex practiced at the wrong time. These destroy the seed, and this is what is known as eating from the tree of life. Because you see, the ancients knew that once the oil is depleted because of riotous living, the fleshly organism dies. Death results from using up all of the oil. You see, the oil that descends from the cerebrum is known otherwise as the manna from heaven. You see, because heaven means heaved up. And the head, the cranium, the dome which sits on top of the torso, that was known as the heavens, you see. And the heart area and the heart chakra was known as the Midgard, or the middle garden. And the generative area was known as Sodom and Gomorrah, the area of desire, animal desire, you see. And otherwise known as Egypt and hell and the world, etc. Whereas the Garden of Eden and the land flowing with milk and honey, that's upstairs. In fact, the pineal gland produces the honey, a secretion known as honey, which has DMT in it, and the pituitary body secretes the milk. This is the milk and honey. Mm-hmm. And the land flowing with milk and honey is upstairs. And the sacred secret is the secret of this oil and how to rise the oil and raise it so that one is illuminated and opened up to the higher mind. As above, so below, you see. This is a sacred secret simply because the secretion which comes from the sacral plexus is one of the most important things that we need to know for physiological regeneration. You see, by saving the seed, one can actually live longer. In fact, the ancients used to live for thousands of years by protecting and keeping this secret and guarding it. The Egyptians built ascension chambers, pyramids, for this very purpose. And they taught the science of respecting and keeping and guarding and looking after this beautiful oil. And if you know the Gospels well, you will know all the scriptures that are referring to it. You see, I am the light of the world. He that follows me shall not walk in darkness. The light of the world is the optic thalamus. Keep your eye simple, for if your eye is dark, your whole body will be dark. That eye has always been known as the third eye. In fact, it's the spiritual eye. Now, as for the deniers, you see, most churchgoers will be denying this because in their mind, Jesus Christ is a historical person which must return physically in order to save them, because they cannot save themselves. They need a vicarious third-party savior. Whereas the opposite is true. And this is what the so-called Apostle Paul was talking about when he referred to the sacred secret of the Christ within, the Christ that dwelleth within. For you see, the kingdom of God is within. It's not without.
That's right.
And in fact, the words of Jesus are pretty clear where it says, do not be looking out there, for the kingdom of God will not come with striking observableness. Don't look here and don't look there, because there will be deceivers saying, oh, there he is, here is the Christ, there is the Christ. Because the process is within. And unless one is able to raise that energy and get out of the bottom chakras. You see, the bottom chakras deal with sexuality, strife, envy, power, greed, wealth, and all of those things. And if one is constantly seeking those things and constantly eating of the fruit of the tree of life, you see those beautiful nerves, the pneumogastric nerve system, they are responsible for bringing the oil back up to the top of the chimney. You see, because Santa Claus brings good presents, those beautiful spiritual presents. And we are the ones who are responsible for channeling that oil, that Christ seed within, so that it eventually is crucified in the middle of the head. You see, the cerebrum is hollowed out, and the midbrain and the limbic system.
Christos, the Christ. Crisco, or Christos.
At the top of the spinal cord is the Holy of Holies. And the cerebellum, which sits at the back of the brain, this is otherwise known as the small brain. The cerebrum is associated with the top of the head, Aries, and the cerebellum is associated with Taurus, and the left brain, the male left brain. The right brain is the feminine, and it is connected to the cerebrum, Aries, the God brain. You see, we have the God man is the cerebrum, the Adam man is the cerebellum. Now, churchgoer, you won't get any of this in church. This is esoteric truth. Exoteric truth denies this and has been perpetuated for the last few thousand years by so-called Christian churches in order to deny and hide the true story of physical regeneration. In the past, people have lived for thousands of years by preserving and conserving this oil and transmuting it so that it reaches the optic thalamus. You see, what happens when the oil reaches the optic thalamus is that new blood is generated in the body. Until such time as this process has occurred, we will have old toxic blood in our physical organisms. And in order to regenerate and produce new blood, the oil must be raised to the optic thalamus, and healing can occur. And as I said before, the millions of dormant brain cells are reactivated. And the heavens, the cerebrum, were awaiting the return of the prodigal son. You see, because we all have these dormant brain cells in our brains. And this is why when you go down to the shopping mall and you see the way people behave, it appears that they are zombies, zombified, and brain dead. Yes, because they have not returned any of the oil. And in the Bible, this is known as tithing. You see, this is why the Bible says you must return 1/10 to the Lord. Remember, the Lord, the Lord, refers to the gold. You see, this is how we turn lead into gold.
Alchemy.
Our spinal cord is like a thermometer. And as the mercury rises with warmth, the more so, with enlightenment, and consciousness and knowledge, we are able to raise the condition of this oil. And as it climbs the spine and ascends, it raises its vibration. In fact, when it gets crucified at the top of the spine where the pneumogastric nerve is crossed, this does not mean death. This means, crucifixion means to multiply 1,000-fold. And you see, not only is physical regeneration a result of this, but also spiritual regeneration. And one is able to experience the higher mind and clairvoyance. You see, mediumship occurs down in the solar plexus. There are 4 brains in the human body. The cerebrum, what is otherwise known as the God brain, the cerebellum, which is the man brain, the medulla oblongata, which is responsible for the involuntary actions in the body, such as breathing and blood circulation. And the 4th brain is the solar plexus, which is more related to the animal instinctive brain, which receives images from the ether, from the air, you see, just like the animals do. And they react correspondingly without reason and logic, instinctively. So you see, this is why it is so important to raise the oil, so that one can get out of the lower mind. The lower mind is the solar plexus, and wrought with problems. You see, this is where the elites have known this secret. They have destroyed it because they have gone after the so-called heretics and renegades and unbelievers who have been teaching the true story of the Christ within and the ascension process within. You see, this rapture that all the Christians are waiting for is not going to happen outside. Ascension is within. One ascends to heaven, the heaved up place, the dome of the cerebrum. You see, those 2 flaps, those hollowed out hemispheres of the cerebrum, are otherwise known as the cherubim. You see, in the Bible, God says to Moses, you must build the Ark of the Covenant with 2 cherubim above the Ark, covering over. And inside the Ark shall be placed the manna and the law of God, the 2 tablets. Well, I'm here to tell you that the optic thalamus is the Ark of the Covenant. And the limbic system and the midbrain, the pons, the medulla oblongata, the pineal gland, these are the Holy of Holies. This is where one needs to return the good oil. The secret of secrets. This has been known to the ancients. It's in the Bible. It's in all of the legendary books. All of the characters, all of them, they are all in the body. In the middle of the head, there is something known as the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the little horse. This is the white horse that Jesus rides upon. There is something known as Ammon's horn. Yeah, absolutely. Ammon's horn in the middle of the head. Ammon's horn? Goodness me. Would that be in Jesus' name, Ammon, the same dude? Yeah, it would. We have the claustrum. We have the cerebrum, the covering angels, the cherubim, which cover over, because the cerebrum covers over the cerebellum and the midbrain and the optic thalamus and the pineal gland and the pituitary gland, otherwise known as Joseph and Mary. You see, these 2 are the ones that are responsible for sending the oil down the spine, down the spinal cord. And they are the ones that await the return of their son, who is born in Bethlehem, the solar plexus, once a month. Once a month, when the moon is in the sun sign that you were born under. This is why astrology is so crucial. And this is why the churches go after it. You see, because the Bible condemns astrology. Yeah. You see, living riotously, overeating, consuming too much alcohol, these are poisons to the oil. These dry up the oil. And once the oil is dried up, the human organism dies. It cannot live without the oil that comes from the cerebrum. This beautiful fluid, the crystalline dew, which comes from the heaved up place, the heaven, and it comes down to the sacrum, the secretion, which is the secret, the sacred secret of the Christ within. So guys, I'd like to encourage one and all. I've done a presentation last week on Wednesday. Once that is edited, it will be up on the internet. I have graphs showing all the body parts that correspond to the Holy Land. The Holy Land is within, people. The Holy Land is the body. The Jordan River is the spinal cord. You see, Jesus gets baptized at the age of 30 and crucified at the age of 33. These correspond to the bones of the vertebrae. And as we progress with that oil by degree, we get our degrees. You see, we graduate with high honors and degrees. The degrees are referring to the spinal cord. And if we stay in the sacrum, sacred though it is, we do not ever climb Jacob's ladder to the place which Jacob called Peniel. You see, in Genesis, Jacob laid his head upon a stone. That stone is the 5 fused bones of the sacrum, where the seed is born. And if we are able to wrestle with the angel, as Jacob did, and he got a name change to Israel, then we are able to see God face to face, because that's what Jacob did when he climbed the ladder. And he called the place Peniel. Interesting.
Man's Inner Guide by Lou Millette. Originally appearing in Azoth magazine. Narrated by Matthew Schmitz. The era of emancipation from the thraldom of woeful worship is dawning. Man is no longer content with man-made creeds. His heart cries out for freedom. He feels something stirring within his being, something akin to what he has been taught to look upon as a faraway ruler of righteousness. Indeed, a supreme ruler of earth and sky whose nature is divine, though at times vindictive, violently provoked, and furiously inclined. By the application of common sense, man has learned to discriminate between false teachings and true knowledge. He is no longer held in bondage by the voice of fear. He feels surer of himself on matters of deeper importance for the welfare of his complex being. And, though his thoughts clash with the antiquated beliefs of priest and prince, his better judgment tells him not to worry about what these self-styled rulers of men declare they will do to him if he dares to laugh, to scorn their decalogues of rotting rules of conduct and testaments of overinflated and tyrannical catechisms of obedience. These welcome signs of individual awakening point to a further realization on man's part that what others have done in the past and are doing in the present, he can also do. If the great law of impartial justice still operates with the mathematical precision for beast and man, then truly nothing is impossible of achievement, and no power is too sacred to be totally ignored for fear of incurring the ill will of a touch-me-not potentate. Thus it is that man reasons and speculates on the possibilities and hidden potencies of his heretofore neglected better nature. He has chosen to burn midnight oil for the explicit purpose of finding out for himself whether the promptings of the heart are of more value to him in the actual living of a life of peace than are the unreasonable requests of a veritable host of greedy and dominant impostors. As a direct result of this novel attitude of mind toward things that were usually taken as a matter of course, because of an existing belief that regal mantle and cap and gown were the only duly assigned administrators of godly justice, man has risen above the level of vicarious service, and by crawling out of his limited shell of physical dependence, with his eyes open to the light of truth that is streaming through his soul, he has reached the plane of a higher understanding and resolved to do his own thinking, come what may. This resolution has transformed the mortal man of flesh and bones into a creature of renascent reality. It has made of him a son of God in the making. It has given him the strength to overcome the evils in his own nature and align himself with the constructive forces for the greatest good of downtrodden and deceived mankind. The words of Pope ring true in his ears because they voice a statement of a high caliber and comforting hope. Man, know then thyself, presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man. Man is literally letting the dead past bury its dead. He has given up worrying about the final outcome of life. His better nature tells him that all is well with the world, and all the world is watching and waiting for the coming of the Son of God that has come to life within him. Realizing this for the first time in his life, this Son of God within man has virtually and truly become a tangible asset to man, and through man is gradually unfolding the secrets of all the ages past, placing, as it were, the keys of the mysteries of being within his ready reach, and impelling him to search the depths of his own nature for the priceless heritage of enduring riches. The peculiar inner urge that men felt now and then has become a vivid sense of conscious awareness, and the thing called consciousness is no longer a bugaboo of terror, but is, instead of this, a voice of lovable and delightful helpfulness, a great friend in the hour of need, and a constant companion possessing prestige and power, plus the courage to do things in accordance with those standards of conduct which are the visible symbols of an all-knowing inner guide. And thus, vagary, vacuity, and vacillation of mind have been superseded by the holy trinity of intuitive conviction, divine inspiration, and steadiness of aim in the quest of wisdom. High-sounding titles are no longer necessary to place man in touch with the reality within his being. Education is to be desired and striven for with determination of purpose and singleness of aim. But it does not really matter whether man has matriculated from the ranks of nobility or from the files of earthly limitations. If his heart is pure and his mind free from bias, he will be received with open arms by the teachers of mankind and be dealt with impartial goodwill and loving interest in whatsoever channel he may choose to sail. No one will be able to thwart his plans. No one will succeed in weaning him away from his ideal. Likewise, having his whole nature attuned to unselfish love, he will render a creditable account of himself ere his inner guide calls him to other labors. With his mind centered on the upliftment of the race, and his thoughts trained to respond to the call of the directive will within him, he will soon soar to the heights beyond the commonplace, and, casting a loving glance over the panorama that greets his newborn sight, he will gladly forget his passion for place and pledge the best part of his nature to the great cause of truth. To such a one, pleasure is hidden in service, and happiness is extracted from the perplexing and puzzling duties of the day. Being free to function on many planes of human need with consciousness aroused and the will set for any trial or care, this resurrected being strikes out in boldest fashion for the hilltops of superior achievement and synthesized virtue. He knows the cost of sorrow because he has experienced it. He knows the price of selfishness because he himself was formerly selfish. And now that he understands the purpose of the plan that his inner guide laid out in the beginning, he is ready to bear every trial and share every sort of joy found by the wayside of life. Having passed through the refining fire of personal experience and burned off the ragged edges of his selfish nature of his own free will and accord, he is now glad to tell the world something about man's true relationship to his inner guide and to the invisible intelligence that causes him to live and move and have his being on earth. The sublime sentinel guarding the fort of man's heart is none other than his inner guide. This is the meaning of reality. Man's real self stands for it. The true God of man's being is the divine voice rooted in the core of his inner nature. This living and loving reality is in man to inspire and assist him whenever there is need. Man can, if he so chooses, manifest the presence of his inner guide, this God within him, to the world about him. He has it within his power to grow more and more like him, and not only reflect the divine image and likeness of his indwelling master, but too, he can become a living counterpart of all that his inner guide stands for. That is, love, light, divinity, wisdom, understanding, truth, honor, courage, youth, freedom, and the countless and numberless other characteristics that voice the immanence of God in man's being. What the God in man is, man can become. What man's inner God stands for, man can translate into action while yet in the body of flesh. He does this by a resolute firmness of mind, and by growing like his inner guide, the true God of his soul. He conquers every foe, overcomes every obstacle in his path, and meets every lion on the way face to face with a coolness that bespeaks superiority of knowledge and supremacy of intuitive conviction. Even death has no terror for him. He knows that death is but a talisman of a new and better beginning with friends and loving companions in receptive attitude of mind and welcoming preparation of soul. Through his schooling, he has learned to smile upon the great Reaper when the hour of his emancipation from physical embodiment strikes. His training has enabled him to raise his action to the higher level of conscious unification with his indwelling guide, the Christ power within his being. It is man's inner guide that cries out for freedom. It is this voice that speaks in the silence of man's soul with the courage that is born of conviction. This is the presence that says, I am resolved. No autocrat, no despot shall coerce my liberty. No tyrant nor dominant ruler shall claim my freedom. No vile wielder of bloody weapons shall break my godlike will. These gifts are mine, to use with judgment and discretion for the greatest good of impoverished and enslaved humanity. Again, and with like force, the real self sings its song of freedom on the altar of independence. Realizing that all power is his to use, he summons every atom of activity to the fore, and with newborn eloquence registers its pledge of honor on the sensitive plate of universal permanence. His first and foremost promise is, I will serve and do my best. And then the voice of invincible definiteness gives form to the inner guide's code of confidence thus. Opportunity, O port of unity. O port of unity, I recognize the force that power of will now dares capsize, and that the central eye of mind and brain fears neither fate nor chance, nor fire nor rain, but works and waits secure upon its throne, and with steadfast calm starves the worthless drone, that leans on limbs of straw and walks on sand, the blindest bully on this mighty land, of wealth and opportunities galore, a land enriched by things that men adore, filled from base to brim with the golden grain that man produces with his inner brain, when once awakened by the might and power of soul confined in mind's creative tower, wherein dwells the spirit that controls and gives direction to all living souls. O port of unity, I will to solve the deeper problems that my eyes convolve in bold attempts to twist my soul and brain into a shapeless mass of thoughts that drain my heart of love and cause my will to swerve from the chosen course that mankind would serve, to bring to naught my once selected goal and cause myself to drift on arid shoal, until the spark of life shall hope no more to earn its passage to the fairer shore, where neither time nor tide control the day, nor mortal shams the hands of justice stay, a kingdom that is ruled by right and light, instead of carnal lusts that fight to fright, in selfish hopes hidden in a weazened brain, that righteous complement that weak minds contain. O port of unity, I now resolve to live my life so that I may absolve my inner self from thoughts that have been lame, and never again refill my heart with shame. The shame that's heaped through ignorance of truth upon the plastic brow of carefree youth, as well as on the heads of sinners old, who paid no heed to what their I had told. With pangs of bitter pain and stress of sin, and through the warnings of their kith and kin, seeking to enlighten a shiftless mind by pointing out the path that men must find. In the central midst of a dried-up brain, whose jewel in the heat of strife has lain, until its priceless grandeur has been lost, and petty man has had to pay the cost. Opportunity, O port of unity, you and I are one. Let us now live and love and serve until our work is done. From the above, it is evident that man must become more than man before it is possible for him to get in tune with his inner guide, or real self, or God. His first cue is to understand that man is not real until he finds out what that something is that makes him a man. That in order to manifest the God presence, he must possess the power to dare assert his individuality, meaning, of course, his inner convictions. He must know whereof he speaks. He must possess the courage to do the things he knows he ought to do, at all times and places, under all circumstances and conditions. Moreover, he must possess the disposition to keep silent in order to protect the interests of humanity and add moral force to the spirit of the age in which he lives. Man must learn that manifestation is but retardation of motion. This definition lifts the veil from the mystery of creation by interpreting for man the essential meaning of the biblical statement, "Before Abraham was, I am." Let not him that seeketh cease from his search until he finds. Verily, then, an ideal conception is but an arrested reality. Substance is immanent in matter, though its vibratory rate of motion is walled in and lies latent until the outer gets in tune with the inner and establishes unity of natures. At the point of balance, an harmonic relationship nullifies the resistance exerted over the indwelling reality and allows the substance to leap forth to freedom. Therefore, that which has been manifested may be easily and readily reproduced, but that which is ideal defies the brain and skill of him who possesses no key to its invisible potentiality. The logical deduction is self-evident, and anyone possessed of normal intelligence will agree that it is not hard to do something when another has pointed out the way. But the worth of a man lies in his ability to initiate that which is latent in the secrecy of his being and in the universe about and around, under and over him, leaving to other less gifted mortals the mockery of imitation and the shallow consolation derived from a covetous sense of profiting through the initiative power of the Creator's superior brain, man's inner guide. In closing, a quotation from a poem entitled "As Above, So Below" will not, it is hoped, go amiss. It is appended for what it may yield in points of inspirational appeal. Let him who heareth the
Hi, I'm John Atack, and this is my good friend Joe Zimhart. And we've been talking behind the scene.
Hello, what have we here?
I'm trying to find something else for us to listen to real quick here. Hey, Jeff, Jay, what's going on? How you doing? How you doing, Jeff, Jay? I'm in my bed listening to this while I'm playing it for y'all. It's cold out here in Georgia, but I'm wrapped up in my cover.
I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
We have not even to risk the adventure alone, for the heroes of all time have gone before us. The labyrinth is thoroughly known. We have only to follow the thread of the hero path. And where we had thought to find an abomination, we shall find a god. And where we had thought to slay another, we shall slay ourselves. Where we had thought to travel outward, we shall come to the center of our own existence. And where we had thought to be alone, we shall be with all the world.
Joseph Campbell on the hero's adventure. He was the teacher everyone would like to have. He was the archetype, to use one of his favorite words, the original, the ideal. One of his students at Sarah Lawrence College, where Campbell taught for almost 40 years, described him as a beaming flashlight into the darkness. The director George Lucas said of Campbell, "If it hadn't been for him, it's possible I would still be trying to write Star Wars." When I met him late in his life, college students across the country had been reading Campbell's influential book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, for years. Scholars pored over his 4-volume study of mythology, The Mask of God. Now he was working on a monumental historical atlas of world mythology. Yet beyond the classroom and lecture halls, only a relative handful of people had ever seen Joseph Campbell in person or heard him speak. That changed with our series. As the broadcast played out over 6 consecutive weeks, the accumulating insight and wisdom had an enormous, unexpected impact. Thousands of letters poured into public television stations around the country. One that I received soon after the first broadcast from a woman in Kew Gardens, New York, summed up the collective reaction. She said, "I will never be the same." The series has been repeated over the years, and people continue to stop me in public to say simply, "Joseph Campbell changed my life." I say to all of them, yes, he was a great teacher. But exactly how and why he touched so many different lives, I can't say. But I can say this. At a time when millions of people were yearning for a way of talking about religious experience without regard to a rigid belief system, Campbell gave them the language for it. He said myths were clues to our spiritual nature, and they could help guide us to a sacred place within where we might unlock the creative power of our deeper unconscious self. And then there was the brilliant clarity he brought to the great and enduring theme of mythology across the ages, the hero's adventure. He tracked that theme in the symbols, stories, and rituals that keep appearing in different cultures, coming alive in literature, art, and religion, and today in movies, comic books, and yes, video games.
That's right.
Campbell
That's right.
believed the most heroic of all acts is the courage to discover who you are and what you would like to be, to slay the savage dragon of the ego, and to follow your bliss to the truth of your life. We taped these conversations at George Lucas's Skywalker Ranch in California over the last 2 summers of Campbell's life. Naturally, we began with his favorite subject, the hero with 1,000 faces.
Why the hero with 1,000 faces?
Well, because there is a certain typical hero sequence of actions, which can be detected in stories from all over the world and from many, many periods of history. And I think it's essentially, you might say, the one deed done by many, many different people.
Why are there so many stories of the hero or of heroes in mythology?
Well, because that's what's worth writing about. I mean, even in popular novel writing, you see the main character is a hero or a heroine. That is to say, someone who has found or achieved or done something beyond the normal range of achievement and experience. A hero properly is someone who has given his life to something bigger than himself or other than himself.
So in all of these cultures, whatever the costume the hero might be wearing, what is the deed?
Well, there are 2 types of deed. One is the physical deed, the hero who has performed a war act or a physical act of heroism, saving a life. That's a hero act. Giving himself, sacrificing himself to another. And the other kind is the spiritual hero who has learned or found a mode of experiencing the supernormal range of human spiritual life, and then come back and communicated it. It's a cycle. It's a going and a return that the hero cycle represents. But then this can be seen also in the simple initiation ritual, where a child has to give up his childhood and become an adult, has to die, you might say, to its infantile personality and psyche, and come back as a self-responsible adult. It's a fundamental experience that everyone has to undergo. We're in our childhood for at least 14 years, and then to get out of that posture of dependency, psychological dependency, into one of psychological self-responsibility requires a death and resurrection. And that is the basic motif of the hero journey, leaving one condition, finding the source of life to bring you forth in a richer or more mature or other condition.
So that if we happen not to be heroes in the grand sense of redeeming society, we have to take that journey ourselves spiritually, psychologically, inside us.
That's right. And Otto Rank, in his wonderful, very short book called The Myth of the Birth of the Hero, he says that everyone is a hero in his birth. He has undergone a tremendous transformation from a little, you might say, water creature living in a realm of the amniotic fluid and so forth, and then coming out, becoming an air-breathing mammal that ultimately will be self-standing and so forth. This is an enormous transformation, and it is a heroic act, and it's a heroic act on the mother's part to bring it about. That's the primary hero form, you might say.
Still a journey to be taken after that.
There's a big one to be taken.
And that journey is not consciously undertaken. Do heroes go out on their own initiative?
Well, they're both kinds. a very common one that appears in Celtic myths of someone who has followed the lure of a deer or animal that he has been following, and then carries him into a range of forest and landscape that he's never been in before. And then the animal will undergo a transformation and become the queen of the fairy hills or something like that. That is one of not knowing what you're doing. You suddenly find yourself in full career of an adventure. There's another one where one sets out responsibly and intentionally to perform the deed. For instance, when Ulysses' son Telemachus was called by Athene, go find your father. That father quest is a major hero adventure for young people. That is the adventure of finding what your career is, what your nature is, what your source is. He undertakes that intentionally. Then there's one into which you are thrown and pitched. For instance, being drafted into the army. You didn't intend it, they are in. You're in another transformation. You've undergone a death and resurrection. You put on a uniform. You're another creature.
So does the heroism have a moral objective?
The moral objective is that of saving a people or saving a person or saving an idea. He is sacrificing himself for something. That's the morality of it. Now, you, from another position, might say that something was something that should not have been realized, you know. That's judgment from another side. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't destroy the heroism of what was done. Absolutely not.
Well, that's a different angle on heroes than I got when I was reading as a young boy the story of Prometheus going after the fire and bringing it back and benefiting humanity and suffering for it.
I mean, Prometheus brings fire to mankind and consequently civilization. That's, by the way, a universal theme.
What is?
The hero, the fire theft theme usually with a relay race after it. Often it's blue jay or woodpecker or something like this that steals the fire and then passes it on to something else and something else, one animal after another. And they're burned by the fires as they're carrying it on. And that accounts for the different colorings of animals and so forth. It's a worldwide myth, the fire theft.
Do these stories of the hero vary from culture to culture?
Well, it's the degree of the illumination that or action that makes him different. There is a typical early culture hero who goes around slaying monsters. Now that is in the period of history when man is shaping his world out of a wild, savage, unshaped world. Well, it has another shape, but it's not the shape for man. He goes around killing monsters.
So the hero evolves over time, like most other concepts and ideas. And
well, he evolves as the culture evolves. Yeah. Now, Moses is a hero figure. In his ascent of the mountain, his meeting with Yahweh on the summit of the mountain, and coming back with the rules for the formation of a whole new society. That's the hero act. Departure, fulfillment, return. And on the way, there are adventures that can be paralleled also in other traditions. Now, the Buddha figure, it's like that of the Christ. Of course, 500 years earlier, you could match those two traditions right down the line, even to the characters of their apostles or their monks. Christ, now there's a perfectly good hero deed formula represented there. And he undergoes 3 temptations. The economic temptation, where the devil says, you look hungry, young man, change the stones to bread. Jesus said, man lives not by bread alone, but every word from the mouth of God. Next, we have the political temptation. He's taken to the top of a mountain and shown the nations of the world and says, you can come into control of all these if you'll bow to me. And then, no, you're so spiritual. Let's go up to the top of Herod's temple and see you cast yourself down, and God will bear you up and you won't even bruise your heel. So he says, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. Those are the three temptations of Christ in the desert. The Buddha also goes into the forest, has conferences with the leading gurus of the day, and goes past them. Comes to the Bo tree, the tree of illumination, undergoes three temptations. They're not the same temptations, but they are three temptations. And one is that of lust, another is that of fear, and another is that of social duty, doing what you're told. And then both of these men come back and they choose disciples who help them establish a new way of consciousness in terms of what they have discovered there. These are the same hero deeds. These are the spiritual hero deeds. Moses, the Buddha, Christ, Muhammad literally, and we know this about him. He was a camel caravan master, but he would leave his home and go out into a little mountain cave that he found and meditate and meditate and meditate and meditate. And one day a voice says, "Write," and we have the Quran, you know. It's an old story.
Sometimes it seems to me that we ought to feel pity for the hero instead of admiration. So many of them have sacrificed their own needs.
They all have.
And very often what they accomplish is shattered by the inability of the followers to see.
Yeah. You come out of the forest with gold and it turns to ashes. That's another motif that occurs.
In this culture of easy religion, cheaply achieved, it seems to me we've forgotten that all three of the great religions teach that the trials of the hero journey are a significant part of it, that there's no reward without renunciation and without a price. The Quran speaks, "Do you think that you shall enter the garden of bliss without such trials as come to those who passed before you?"
Well, if you realize what the real problem is, and that is of losing primarily thinking about yourself and your own self-protection, losing yourself, giving yourself to another. That's what a trial in itself, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
There's a big transformation of consciousness that's concerned. And what all the myths have to deal with is transformation of consciousness. That you're thinking in this way, and you have now to think in that way.
Well, how is the consciousness transformed?
By the trials.
The tests that the hero
Tests
undergoes.
or certain illuminating revelations. Trials and revelations are what it's all about.
Well, who in society today is making any heroic myth at all for us? Do movies do this? Do movies create hero myths?
I don't know. Now, my experience of movies, I mean, the significant experience I had of movies was when I was a boy, and they were all really movies. They weren't talkies. They were black and white movies. And I had a hero figure who meant something to me, and he served as a kind of model for myself in my physical character, and that was Douglas Fairbanks. I wanted to be a synthesis of Douglas Fairbanks and Leonardo da Vinci. That was my idea. But those were models, were roles that came to me.
Does a movie like Star Wars fill some of that need for the spiritual adventure, for the hero?
Oh, it's perfect. It does the cycle perfectly. It's not simple morality play. It has to do with the powers of life and their inflection through the action of man. One of the wonderful things I think about this adventure into space is that the narrator, the artist, the one thinking up the story, is in a field that is not covered by our own knowledges, you know. There was much of the adventure in the old stories is where they go into regions that no one's been in before. Well, we've now conquered the planet, so there are no empty spaces for the imagination to go forth and fight its own war, you know, with powers. And that was the first thing I felt there. There's a whole new realm for the imagination to open out and live its forms.
Do you, when you look at something like Star Wars, recognize some of the themes of the hero throughout mythology?
Well, I think that George Lucas was using standard mythological figures. The old man as the advisor. Well, specifically, what he made me think of is the Japanese sword master.
Remember, a Jedi can feel the Force flowing through him.
I've known some of those people, and this man has a bit their character.
Well, there's something mythological too, isn't there, in the sense that the hero is helped by this stranger who shows up and gives him some instrument, a sword or a sheaf of light, shaft of light.
He gives him not only a physical instrument, but a psychological commitment and a psychological center.
This time, let go your conscious self and act on instinct.
Well, he had him exercising with that strange weapon and then pulled the mask over. That's real Japanese stuff.
I'll take her myself.
When I took our two sons to see it, they did the same thing the audience did at that moment when the voice of Ben Kenobi says to Luke Skywalker in the climactic moment,
"Use the Force, Luke. Let go, Luke."
The audience broke out into elation, into applause.
Well, you see, this thing communicates. It is in a language that is talking to young people today, and that's marvelous.
So the hero goes for something. He doesn't just go along for the ride. He's not a mere adventurer.
Well, a serendipitous adventure can take place also. You know what the word serendipity comes from? It comes from the Sanskrit, Serendripa, the Isle of Silk, which was formerly the name of Ceylon. And it's a story about a family that's just rambling on its way to Ceylon, and all these adventures take place. So you can have the serendipitous adventure as well.
Is the adventurer who takes that kind of trip a hero in the mythological
He is ready for it. This is a very interesting thing about these mythological themes. The achievement of the hero is one that he is ready for, and it's really a manifestation of his character. And it's amusing the way in which the landscape and the conditions of the environment match the readiness of the hero. The adventure that he's ready for is the one that he gets.
Look, I ain't in this for your revolution, and I'm not in it for you, Princess. I expect to be well paid.
The mercenary, Solo, begins as a mercenary and ends up as a hero.
He was a very practical guy, a materialist in his character, at least as he thought of himself, but he was a compassionate human being at the same time and didn't know it. The adventure evoked a quality of his character that he hadn't known he possessed.
I love you.
He thinks he's an egoist, he really isn't. And that's a very lovable kind of human being, I think, and there are lots of them functioning beautifully in the world. They think they're working for themselves, very practical and all, but no, there's something else pushing them.
What did you think about the scene in the bar?
That's my favorite, not only in this piece, but in many, many pieces I've ever seen. Well, where you are is on the edge. You're about to embark into the outlying spaces. And
the real adventure.
Real adventure. This is the jumping off place. And there is where you meet people who've been out there. And they run the machines that go out there, and you haven't been there. It reminds me a little bit in Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. The atmosphere before you start off the adventure. You're in a seaport, and there's old salt seamen who've been on the sea, and that's their world, and these are the space people also.
I got a bad feeling about this.
The walls are moving. Don't just stand there Try and brace it with something.
But my favorite scene was when they were in the garbage compactor and the walls were closing in, and I thought that's like the belly of the whale that Joe
That's
Campbell.
what it is. Yeah, that's where they were. Yeah, down in the belly of the whale.
What's the mythological significance of the belly?
It's the descent into the dark. Jonah in the whale. I mean, that's a standard motif of going into the whale's belly and coming out again.
Why must the hero do that?
The whale represents the personification, you might say, of all that is in the unconscious. In reading these things psychologically, water is the unconscious. The creature in the water would be the dynamism of the unconscious, which is dangerous and powerful and has to be controlled by consciousness. The first stage in the hero adventure, when he starts off on adventure, is leaving the realm of light, which he controls and knows about, and moving toward the threshold. And it's at the threshold that the monster of the abyss comes to meet him. And then there are 2 or 3 results. One, the hero is cut to pieces and descends into the abyss in fragments to be resurrected. Or he may kill the dragon power, as Siegfried does when he kills the dragon. But then he tastes the dragon blood. That's say he has to assimilate that power. And when Siegfried has killed the dragon and tasted the blood, he hears the song of nature. He has transcended his humanity, and associated himself with the powers of nature, which are the powers of our life, from which our mind removes us. You see, this thing up here, this consciousness thinks it's running the shop. It's a secondary organ. It's a secondary organ of a total human being, and it must not put itself in control. It must submit and serve the humanity of the body.
Join me, and I will complete your training.
When it does put itself in control, you get this father, the man who's gone over to the intellectual side.
I'll never join you! If you only knew the power of the dark side.
He isn't thinking or living in terms of humanity, he's living in terms of a system. And this is the threat to our lives. We all face it. We all operate in our society in relation to a system. Now, is the system going to eat you up and relieve you of your humanity? Or are you going to be able to use the system to human purposes?
Would the hero with 1,000 faces help us to answer that question about how to change the system so that we are not serving it?
I don't think it would help you to change the system, but it would help you to live in the system as a human being.
By doing what?
Well, like Luke Skywalker, not going over, but resisting its impersonal claims.
But I can hear someone out there in the audience saying, well, that's all well and good for the imagination of a George Lucas or for the scholarship of a Joseph Campbell, but that isn't what happens in my life.
You bet it does. If the person doesn't listen to the demands of his own spiritual and heart life and insists on a certain program, you're going to have a schizophrenic crack up. The person has put himself off center. He has aligned himself with a programmatic life, and it's not the one the body's interested in at all. And the world's full of people who have stopped listening to themselves. In my own life, I've had many opportunities to commit myself to a system and to go with it and to obey its requirements. My life has been that of a maverick. I would not submit.
You really believe that the creative spirit ranges on its own out there beyond the boundaries?
Yeah, I do.
Something of the hero in that. I don't mean to suggest that you see yourself as a hero.
No, I don't, but I see myself as a maverick.
So perhaps the hero lurks in each one of us when we don't know it.
Well, yes. I mean, our life evokes our character, and you find out more about yourself as you go on. And it's very nice to be able to put yourself in situations that will evoke your higher nature rather than your lower.
Give me an example.
I'll give you a story. I'm dealing with an Iroquois story right now. There's a motif that comes in American Indian stories very often, what I call the refusal of suitors. A girl with her mother lived in a wigwam on the edge of the village. She was a very handsome girl, but extremely proud, and would not accept any of the boys. They proposed to her through the mother, and the mother was terribly annoyed with her. Well, one day they're out collecting wood, and they have gone a long way from the village. And while they are collecting the wood, a terrific darkness comes over them. Now, this wasn't the darkness of night descending. When you have a darkness like that, there's some magician at work somewhere. So the mother says, well, let's gather some bark and make a little wigwam, a bark wigwam for ourselves, and collect wood for a fire, and we'd just spend the night here. So they do that, and the mother falls asleep. And the girl looks, and there's this magnificent guy standing there with a wampum sash, glorious, and feathers, and all this kind of black feathers. He says, I've come to marry you, and I'll await your reply. She accepts the guy, and the mother accepts the man. And he gives the mother the wampum belt to prove that he's serious about all this. So he goes away with the girl. She has acquiesced. Mere human beings weren't good enough for her, but here's something that really, so she's in another domain. Now the adventure is marvelous. She goes with him to his village, and they enter his lodge. The people in there greet her, and she feels very comfortable about it and all. And then the next day he says, I'm going off to hunt. So he leaves the lodge, and the door is closed with a flap. There's a flap. When he closes the flap, she hears a strange sound. So there's the whole day, and she's just in the hut. And as evening comes, she hears that strange sound again. And the door flap is flung off, and in comes this prodigious serpent with his tongue darting, and he puts his head in her lap and says, now you must search my head for lice and things like that. And she finds all kinds of horrible things there and kills them all. And then he withdraws, and in a moment, after the gate door has been closed, it opens again, and in he comes. It's the same beautiful young man again, and said, were you afraid of me when I came in just now? No, she said she wasn't at all afraid. Next day he goes off to hunt. And then she leaves the lodge to gather wood. And the first thing she sees is an enormous serpent basking on the rocks. And then another, and then another. And she begins to feel very badly, very homesick and discouraged. Then the evening, the serpent, and then the man again. The third day, when he leaves, she decides she's going to try to get out of this place. So she goes out, and she's standing in the woods thinking, and a voice speaks to her, and she turns, and there's a little old man there. And he says, darling, you are in trouble. The man that you've married is one of 7 brothers. They are great magicians. And like many people of this kind, their hearts are not in their bodies. There's a collection of 7 hearts in a bag that is hidden under the bed of the eldest to whom you are married. You must go get that, and then we'll deal with the next part of the adventure. She goes in and finds a bag of hearts and is running out, and the voice calls after her, stop, stop. It's the voice of the magician. And she continues to run. He says, you may think you can get away from me, but you never can. And just at that point, she hears the voice of the old man. He says, I'll help you, dear. And he's pulling her out of the water. She didn't even know that she was in water.
What does that say to you?
That's to say, you have moved out of the hard land, the solid earth, and are in the field of the unconscious. And she had pulled herself into the transcendent realm and got caught in the negative powers of the abyss, and she's being rescued now by the upper powers. What you have done has been to elevate yourself out of the local field and put yourself in a field of higher power, higher danger. And are you going to be able to handle it? If you are not eligible for this place into which you put yourself, it's going to be a demon marriage. It's going to be a real mess. If you are eligible, it can be a glory that will give you a life that is yours in your own way.
So these stories of mythology are simply trying to express a truth that can't be grasped any other way.
It's the edge, the interface between what can be known and what is never to be discovered, because it is a mystery transcendent of all human research. The source of life. What is it? No one knows.
Why are stories important for getting at that?
Well, I think it's important to live life with a knowledge of its mystery and of your own mystery. And it gives life a new zest, a new balance, a new harmony to do this. Therapy and psychological therapy, when people find out what it is that's ticking in them, they get straightened out. And what is it that life is? I find thinking in mythological terms has helped people visibly. You can see it happen.
How? What does it do?
It erases anxieties. It puts them in accord with the inevitables of their life, and they can see the positive values of what are the negative aspects of what is positive. It's whether you're going to say no to the serpent or yes to the serpent. It's easy as that.
No to the adventure?
Yeah, the adventure of being alive, of living.
When I was growing up, tales of King Arthur, tales of the medieval knights, tales of the dragon slayers were very strong in my world.
Dragons represent greed, really. The European dragon guards things in his cave, and what he guards are heaps of gold and virgins. And he can't make use of either of them, but he just guards. There's no vitality of experience, either of the value of the gold or of the female whom he's guarding there. Psychologically, the dragon is one's own binding of oneself to one's ego, and you're captured in your own dragon cage. And the problem of the psychiatrist is to break that dragon, open him up, so that you can have a larger field of relationships. Jung had a patient come to him who felt alone, and she drew a picture of herself as caught in the rocks. From the waist down, she was bound in rocks. And this was on a windy shore, and the wind blowing and her hair blowing, and all the gold, which is the sign of the vitality of life, was locked in the rocks. And the next picture that he had her draw had followed something he had said to her. Suddenly, a lightning flash hit the rocks, and the gold came pouring out. And then she found reflected on rocks round about the gold. And there was no more gold in the rocks. It was all available on the top. And in the conferences that followed, those patches of gold were identified. They were her friends. She wasn't alone. But she had locked herself in her own little room and life, but she had friends. Do you see what I'm meaning? This is killing the dragon. And you have fears and things. This is the dragon. That's exactly what that's all about. At least the European dragon. Chinese dragon is different.
What is it?
It represents the vitality of the swamps, and the dragon comes out beating his belly and saying, ha, 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 ha. You know, that's another kind of dragon. And he's the one that yields the bounty and the waters and all that kind of thing. He's the great, glorious thing.
Hi everyone, welcome in. This is a reading for whoever felt called to click on this video. I trust that there's a message here for you. There's more details about this reading in the description box, but just be sure to take what resonates and leave what does not resonate for someone else. Thank you guys so much for liking the video. I appreciate it. Let's see. We're just going to see what Spirit wants to say. What is the message for those who need a message? What's the message? Space.
The final frontier.
Okay. Tell me more. Consciousness. Wow. Your guides are wanting you to create space here in your mind. Your guides are wanting you to clear your mind, okay? Your guides are wanting you to meditate more. I feel like there's an energy here also with the spaces to hold space for yourself to grow and evolve. And give yourself space from anything that is trying to damage your consciousness or trying to bring your frequency down. Your guides are wanting you to push that away or just create more space in between you and the things that are not serving you, you and the things that are not good for you. And we have rest. Your guides are wanting you to rest. Give yourself room and space to grow. I feel like there may be an environment or a particular situation. We have pain at the bottom of the deck. Something may have been doing more harm than good. But your guides are wanting you to rest. Your guides are wanting you to give yourself room to rest and space to rest and heal, really. And not go too quick, not move too quickly through the pain. We have peace here, and we have abundance. So it's like some of you guys may be in pain, or you may have experienced some heavy pain here, hurt. But after pain comes abundance and peace. And it happens with you giving yourself enough room and separating yourself from the things that keep hurting you. And your guides are really wanting to give yourself the allowance, really, to rest. Okay? Because overworking yourself or overdoing something may be creating more of a burden. You might be really feeling this energy of needing rest is really what I'm getting. I cannot stress that enough. I feel like your guides from now until 2023, into the new year, your guides are really wanting to give yourself space and time to heal, to rest, and to think, okay, about what it is you truly want. With consciousness being here, I feel like your consciousness is like expanding. I feel like you guys are growing, and I feel like your soul's evolving here. But it might have been a really rough end of the year or just a rough year in general. But your guides are saying after the pain comes abundance and peace. There's so much for you to look forward to. So just give yourself the room, give yourself the green light, give yourself the okay to rest, to create space, to hold space for yourself because you're growing. And with the consciousness, and then Jasper, no, you are not. Oh my God. That was Jasper on my tapestry. But anyway, you need room to grow your consciousness, yourself. You need more. How do I want to put this? It's like your guides are telling me that I'm getting the image of like a fishbowl. You know, if you put like a koi fish or like a goldfish into a small fishbowl, it can only grow as big as its environment. That could be metaphorically speaking, but I feel like for some of you guys, you have outgrown your environment, or you've outgrown certain people in your life because you are healing and you are wanting to expand your consciousness. You're wanting to expand your mind here. Okay, is what I'm getting. That's the first message. But there's something really good coming into your life. But you're needing to rest first.
Let's give me a hint to rest.
We're going to get you an angel number. For those of you who have been asking, I got this on Etsy. It's just called, oh, I'm so sorry. I just hit the mic. It's called Angel Number Messages. I got it on Etsy. From Scorpio Mystic Angel. It says by Yvonne. So those of you that are wondering, okay. Beautiful deck, one of my favorites. Let's see. Give me an angel number for those who need a message, for those who are watching this. Let's see. Oh, 777, exactly.
Wow.
It says, I am in the flow. Your purpose flows from within you, and everything that is unfolding or being revealed to you is a part of your purpose.
Wow.
A state of peace and calmness in your soul. Your guides are just really wanting you to go with the flow right now. And this could be a message for someone that might be really hard for you to do. It might be really hard for you to just kind of let go. Some of you guys might take on the burden like of the world, okay? And your guides are really just saying, like, once you've done the work, give yourself space and time to rest and allow your consciousness to develop and grow and evolve. And this is where all these ideas, you see this? This is like all these ideas are coming to you. And your frequency is going to be calling out other people who are in similar mind spaces as you, in similar frequencies as you. You're going to be calling out to these people, and you guys are going to be able to find each other. But you need to rest, and you need to create space to evolve and allow yourself to grow and learn, and allow yourself to change. You're clearly becoming a different version of yourself by the minute. So you could be seeing 777. To me, also talks about having inner strength and patience with yourself. Bottom of the deck, we have 7-7. So 7s are clearly very important to you right now. It says, I am brave. It is the time to move on from the old patterns, habits, and fears. Now is the time to walk in the direction of your biggest desires and ambitions. Now is the time to be bold and brave. So don't be afraid to take bold movements. Don't be afraid to make a statement. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Let's see what else is wanting to come out. Okay. What else, please? Okay. I see you taking inspired action here. It might feel like a struggle though. A lot of you guys, I'm getting you're chasing your dreams. You're taking the lead, okay? You're chasing your dreams, but it could feel like a bit of a struggle, or you could feel like there might be some competition or people trying to hold you down. But it's like, this is you going after what it is you want, your ultimate fulfillment. Don't allow people's petty behavior and nonsense to stop you from what it is you know that you want for yourself, okay? Because the Five of Wands, this being here, tells me that you might come across this. Some of you guys may have already come across this, but it's like you don't have to pay any attention to these. Remember what I said. Create space, okay, and move away from anything that is going to be harming your consciousness, harming your frequency, and dragging you down. You want to avoid this at all costs, because some of you guys, if you are the King of Wands, like, he sees what it is he wants, but then he's also seeing the Five of Wands. The Five of Wands is in his view of his dreams. Don't let anyone hold you back from what it is you feel called to do or what it is you want for yourself. Because there's a lot of tension right now, or you're going to be coming into a place where there might be a lot of tension between you and someone else, or you and another person. Or you and other people in general, sorry. But it's like you have to, this is entrepreneur energy. You're going to have to really take the lead of your life and not allow anyone to, because there's going to be obstacles thrown in your way. Whether this is just hiccups in general, or other people coming for you, or feeling threatened by you, or some of you guys, there's just little hiccups here and there that just happen in life. Your guides are wanting you to keep your eye on the prize. Because if you keep your eye on the prize, Ace of Wands, Temperance, if you keep your composure and have patience for what it is, and you keep planning, there's a lot of progress happening in the year 2023. There's a lot of growth. This talks about growth. You clearly have a ton of potential here, and you have a desired goal. You have a desired outcome. And there may be people that see your potential and they want to throw shade, or they want to throw drama your way, but you cannot let that affect. You can't allow it to block you from what it is you truly want from yourself. And a lot of you guys, this is your purpose. You're being divinely guided toward a purpose. Some of you guys, this is about you discovering your purpose. And this purpose of yours, it's going to flourish because it's your purpose. Like, it's divinely orchestrated for, like, ordained to you. You're being guided to do this. But there's also going to be dark energies and jealous energies and just people in general that see your full potential, even if you don't, that want to get in your way. Even if this isn't people, sometimes these dark energies can latch on to people, and it makes people act all kinds of crazy ways. Because it's like, really, the dark energy doesn't want you to be accomplished, and doesn't want you to serve your bigger goals, your purpose. It doesn't want you to be happy and chase your dreams. But I feel like you guys are going to do it anyway. You're going to see a ton of growth in the year 2023 because of this. Because you're not giving up. Okay. Look at this, the Empress. For some of you guys, this could be a creative project, okay? Or just a lot of growth, a lot of abundance is coming in, okay? This is you sitting in your power, and I feel like you're going to, it's going to be challenging at first, and there's going to be some hiccups, but your skin gets so much thicker, especially with the 777 energy. Your skin is growing thicker. But I do want to keep saying, it does look like there may be someone here that could potentially have a similar interest or a similar goal. And instead of making you it's like someone might want to turn you into a foe or get in your head instead of making you a friend and being on the same team. Mm-hmm. That could be coming your way for sure. And it's because this person sees how much potential you have to grow and flourish. And I feel like somebody here is just not really happy. Okay. And it's like they want to instigate drama. So just be aware of that energy.
You're on fire.
What else? Yeah, this is all about your manifestations. Some of you guys could be developing skills here or studying, but whatever you're focusing your attention on is what you're manifesting. So keep doing that. Keep focusing on your goals, on your dreams. Don't focus on the drama. You may have to take your attention away from the drama, because if you focus too heavily on the potential, hiccups. If you focus your energy too much on the Five of Wands, the struggle, the tension, the competition, the drama, the conflict, you're going to manifest more of that.
Yep.
So your guides are wanting you to pay attention to the things you are focusing on. And there's also something here about skill development. But it's clear to me that you're about to embark on a financial opportunity here, and your guides are just wanting you to focus on the positives, okay? And focus on skill development. Yeah, you're coming into alignment with your purpose, is what this is. And you will find people that are also in alignment with this, and you will find it's not all bad. Okay, actually, the Five of Wands is going to be far and few, believe it or not. But they're loud. The Five of Wands can be very loud, okay? But if you engage in this, you see how everyone's like, this is basically like talking over each other, fighting with each other. It's pointless, right? Because nobody's hearing anybody out. It's just a great big misunderstanding, and the conflict will continue if you stay in that, okay? Your guides are wanting you to be mindful of what you're focusing your attention on, because what you focus your attention on is what you come into alignment with. And your guides are also wanting you to know there are friends, there are people like soul family, there are people that are going to be there's going to be mutual respect. So to just be mindful, focusing on the energy that is not good. I do see you meeting new people here. I see you meeting good connections here. People that are in similar frequencies, okay, in the flow. Let's see. You're going to be, there's a test of faith though. And you're going to need to be persistent. Your guides are wanting, you stay resilient, okay? Your toughness or how bad you truly want something might be tested here. Okay, and then we have the Six of Cups. This is all about understanding your childhood, understanding things that happened to you in the past. Could be some reoccurring issues that may be coming out that your guides are wanting you to work on. Asking yourself why are you focusing on the Five of Wands, or why did you focus on the Five of Wands? Why were you attracting this type of energy into your life? And getting really clear with yourself and understanding why you were so heavily focused on certain things. It has a lot to do with being neglected, or feeling as if maybe you were living on survival mode as a child, or whatever these childhood or past reoccurring issues might be. Your guides are definitely wanting you to get clear with yourself. That way you don't repeat the past. That way you don't repeat cycles in your life, and you can break generational curses here, okay? Yeah, we have the Nine of Swords. Might be in your head about being too vulnerable or open. Some of you guys, there might be a fear or anxiety about being vulnerable here. Being judged, possibly. But it's about analyzing the past so you don't bring it into the current. Does that make sense? Anything else? Ten of Cups. Well, that's beautiful. You're in divine alignment with something, or you're coming into divine alignment with something. And this is all about your ultimate happiness, okay, with this Ten of Cups. This is about harmony, peace, okay, just being extremely happy and feeling abundant and being at peace in life and peace within yourself. But you got to close the door on this Five of Wands energy. You got to not feed into the struggle, really. Because I feel like there might be someone that's miserable, or there might be someone that's struggling themselves, and they could try to pull you into that struggle with them. But if you allow that type of energy to happen, it's just going to prolong your peace, your happiness, okay? So use discernment with what it is. And also ask yourself, if you're someone that keeps having a reoccurring issue with other people, ask yourself why you are attracted to these people or these friendships.
What I wanted to talk about tonight, simply because it's the thing that is moving me to the edge of my chair at the moment is I called the talk Eros and the Eschaton. And what I could have called it is Eros and the Eschaton, What Science Forgot. Because somebody asked me recently, is there any permission to hope? More specifically, is there any permission for smart people to hope? I mean, it's easy to hope if you're stupid, but is there any basis for intelligent people to hope? And I wanted to deal with that because I think so. I mean, it was to me Eros and the Eschaton. These are the two areas that I think compromise the old paradigm and give permission to hope. And strangely,
a lot of familiar faces, so I won't spend too much time introducing myself. The way I view this is about a 9 or 10 hour exposure of us all to each other, and it's too short a time to teach an orthodox ethnobotany class or even a survey course in ethnobotany. But it's longer than the normal hour or 2 hour talk with questions that I give. So I'm hopeful that there will be a lot of interaction and that you've come prepared with questions and that you have special interests that we can develop as we go along. It would be possible for me to simply teach this like a survey course and explain to you the state of the various disciplines which bear on ethnobotany and ethnopsychopharmacology and shamanism. But I think it would be more useful if I stated my own bias and then sort of presented the information from that point of view, because the people who have created the modern science of ethnobotany really didn't intend to do so. It's one of these hybrid sciences like folk taxonomy, ethnobotany, that arise when one discipline seems to overlap into another, so that no real firm foundation for thinking about what ethnobotany and ethnopsychiatry, what these things really are, was ever laid. And I think, by way of sort of a preliminary suggestion as to how that might work, that we have to think about two factors which form human populations and human experience generally. And these are geography, which creates the context in which we find ourselves, and language, with which we create the context we would wish to be in. So we sort of are bound by geography, but freed by language. And this has led to very interesting situations. The geographical and biogeographical facts which lie behind a given area are not very frequently present in the minds of anthropologists or even botanists who investigate these areas. For instance, two portions of the Earth's surface that I have familiarity with are Malaysia and Indonesia and the Amazon basin. And these are two very different kind of situations. What you have with Indonesia is the abutting of a shallow ancient continent against the Eurasian landmass. So,
what's up, Lizzie? I'm just laying here in bed chilling, trying to stay warm.
At the place in
This is Terrence McKenna, Choosing Your Fate.
Thailand called the Isthmus of Kra, what you actually can see there is the migration of Eurasian species and Austral Indian species across a migratory line. So there's an intermixing of flora and fauna at that point. The number of species in an ecology is directly related to the utilizability of the environment by human populations, and this is true of foods as well as drugs and poisons and other kinds of intoxicants. So that there are two situations in which you get ultra-dense speciation. Continental land masses, which have been above water for very long periods of time, so that evolution has gone on uninterrupted by catastrophism. And the two most obvious examples that biogeographers study are the Madagascan, the Madagascan land mass, which includes Seychelles and Madagascar and portions of India, and the South American continent. The South American continent has been above water about 120 million years. So that's 120 million years of continuous speciation at the equator. So there's an extremely dense number of species there, sometimes up to several thousand per square mile. And this is a situation that you don't get in the temperate zone. Temperate zone forests tend to be monocultural and have a low species density. Sometimes, for instance, the Canadian forest is comprised by about 20 species. This is why the climaxed so-called tundra forest is a very so-called monocultural climax. Darren, could I ask you to go to the car and get the big box which is in the back of the Chevy? It's parked down the street a mile. If you could bring the whole thing, that would make it easier. So this is the situation that you start out with, is these intense interrelationships between human beings and plants require species-dense floral environments to get going. Now the reason there's a species-dense environment in Paramalaya, as it's called, is because two continents are colliding there, and the species from both sides are drifting and intermingling, so that in Malaysia, even though it's a small landmass, not a continental landmass, you get very dense speciation.
Oh, you like that, huh?
See, all of Indonesia was once a continent called Sundaland, very recently, in fact, perhaps as recently as a couple of million years ago. And then with the rise of the sea, this continent was turned into a series of islands, and speciation proceeded on each island according to the constraints of that particular ecosystem. And with the rising and falling of the sea level and the islanding and reuniting of different land masses over several cycles of glacial melt, it acted as a pump for evolution, and you see a fantastic species density there as well. So for people interested in the ethnobotany of hallucinogens, this poses a problem, because the distribution of hallucinogens is very lopsided in favor of the New World. In other words, of 800,000, more or less, angiosperms that have been classified, only 20 or so are major hallucinogens, even though several thousand contain psychodynamic alkaloids of one sort or another. But the problems which interfere in their utilization range from low concentration to coincidental appearance with a toxic compound of some sort, This is why, and there are borderline cases, drugs where a hallucinogen will occur with a toxic or emetic compound, but has still been utilized culturally. For instance, morning glory seeds are a good example of that. The seeds of Ipomaea purpura, which is a New World convolvulaceous climber, a morning glory, contain compounds which are related to LSD, but active in a magnitude larger dose. But also coincident with this compound occurs ester coumarin, which is a very strong emetic, makes you vomit. So folk utilization of these morning glories had to develop a way to separate these things out. And this is one of the issues that ethnobotanists have to grapple with, and students of culture generally, which is, how has it happened that these plant interactions have been discovered and utilized by people? And it isn't only plant interactions, it's strange dyeing, not only drug interactions, it's strange dyeing technologies for etching metal, technologies for curing wounds. How do they know what to do with each particular plant? For instance, a case about which we'll hear a lot this weekend, because I will talk about it, and tomorrow my brother will come in and talk about it as well, is this drug complex in South America called ayahuasca, where two plants are brought together, neither of which is particularly active by itself, but together they utilize the pharmacological principle of monoamine oxidase inhibition and create a powerful hallucinogen. So when you go into the field, you have to bear in mind the background geography, of the situation. For instance, the Amazon situation is unique on the planet. The Amazon is the largest river in the world. It's estimated that 20 to 30% of the world's oxygen is being generated by those forests. And yet, the Amazon is a river which once flowed the opposite direction. Before the separation of the African and South American continent 220 million years ago, there was a river which rose in the mountains of Niger and flowed west across the vast expanse of what was then a portion of Gondwana land. Is that right? I think so. And it emptied into the Pacific Ocean. And then when the continents separated, there was subduction of the Nazca Plate under the South American continent, and the entire continent shifted very, very slightly. But because it was basically planar, this slight shift was enough to reverse the flow of the river. And then, of course, the Andes rose, and they're still rising. And so this ecological catastrophe, if you wish, looms very large in looking at the way species were distributed through the Amazon. Now, all these things went on long, long before the advent of man, but they explain the species distribution, the situation as human beings found it when they entered the New World. And when that happened, and the dates now are very controversial, with the most radical people saying that it was up to 2 million years ago, which is considered absolutely unsupportable by the mainstream anthropological opinion, which thinks, that a date of 60,000 years is very high. But whatever happened, it appears that people entered the Amazon both by the Caribbean islands, by radiation which came down across North America, through Florida, through the Caribbean islands. There's one school that believes that Mexico was actually repopulated from the south, that the wave of migration was a great hook passing through the Caribbean and then up the Amazon. But there's very little data, so that there are many competing schools about the history of early man in the Amazon. The point of view I just stated is that of this geographer Donald Lathrop, who studied the languages in the basin and concluded that based on the way cognates proliferate, the languages must have been carried from the mouths of the rivers up to the headwaters. Previous to that, the anthropological theory that held was that large human populations could not arrive in the rainforest, and that civilization in South America was largely a montane phenomenon. The Incas and the San Agustin cultures, and these cultures building always in the Andes, and that when people moved into the jungle, they essentially were subsumed and lost identifiable material culture, which is what the archaeologist is tracing these things by. Now it's not clear. Recent discoveries with side-ranging radar in the Yucatan showed that there, which is of course not South America but Mexico, but that there the Maya had very large areas under cultivation with systems of earthenwork dams and irrigation channels, which allowed them a much greater carrying capacity for their civilization than had previously been suggested for them. This same sort of thing may have existed in the Amazon, but the evidence for it may be much harder to come by because the rivers are shifting so much, because the river changes its course so often. I mean, when you fly over the basin, you see rivers that cannot find their way, rivers that loop hundreds of miles back upon themselves, rivers that, as they meander on each side of them, there are hundreds of what are called oxbow lakes, which are essentially thrown out crescent-shaped arms of the river that have then been left. Because the Andes are a young mountain chain, earthquakes are frequent. I mean, I've not spent years in the Amazon, and I've experienced several earthquakes. And because the land is so flat, these slight earthquakes are actually driving river change in the course of the river. Which reminds me of something else that I should mention, which is to return to the point about the evolution of dense species situations in plants. Before the advent of human beings as a cultural force on the planet, the major force, it's thought by evolutionary biologists, which drove plant evolution was the meandering of rivers. Because you see, the way evolution works is there is never much of it where there is a highly evolved and integrated ecosystem, because that is a set of interlocking niches, each of which is occupied. The place where evolution takes place is in so-called barren lands, where it's up for grabs, where whoever gets there first has the advantage. This is, and rivers, as they change their course, expose millions of acres every year of bank. And it is this contest for who shall occupy the bank that was, before the advent of man, the major force driving plant speciation. This is why we have weeds. If you look at what weeds are annular plants which produce thousands and thousands of seeds and which grow very readily. In other words, their strategy for survival is rapid growth and massive seed dispersal. This is a strategy which would only work in a barren land or open land situation. It would never work in a primary or climaxed ecosystem of any sort. Because the Amazon basin is the world's largest river system, it has that going for it too, driving the engine of evolution. So it is a continental landmass, which always means as the potential for plant and animal populations expands, there's always a greater potential for evolutionary drift. So that happens more on continents. And then it is equatorial. It's thought that evolution proceeds faster. Well, it's not that it's thought. It's obvious that evolution proceeds faster in the tropics because there can be continuous generations. For instance, in the butterflies or something like that, you don't get one brood a year. You can sometimes get up to 6. Well, each mating season constitutes an opportunity for gene transfer and for the appearance of new characteristics. So this is another factor, the equatorial situation of these continents, of the South American continent and the submerged continent of Indonesia, which presents itself now as an island chain. To return then to the human impact on the Amazon basin and the plant formation, though we cannot pick out the irrigation channeling that has been visible in Quintana Roo, it's probably because of the shifting nature of the river. Lathrop and his co-workers have found kitchen midden soil 1.5 meters deep in various parts of the basin, which indicates very long habitation and extreme sedentariness of the population. In other words, we're not dealing here apparently with hunting and gathering groups. To have kitchen midden soil 1.5 meters deep, people have to settle for several hundred years. It must mean that there's some kind of agriculture, perhaps aquaculture, something like that the North American Indians practiced with wild rices, this kind of thing. So in this situation of very dense speciation, human societies are inimical. We probably arose in this kind of situation, though because humanity presumably arose in Africa, Africa is the most heavily human impacted continent on a mass scale over long periods of time, so that there is low species count in the forests and large degrees of desertification, this kind of thing. For instance, again, using the side-ranging radar technique, but in a different mode, they were able recently to penetrate through the sands of the southern Sahara up to a depth of about 30 feet, because the sand is transparent to radar, and they uncovered river courses that showed that north of what is today the Sahel, the ancient Africa was very wet. And it's in the same area that you get the Tassili frescoes, where you see herders with their cattle and with shaman with mushrooms sprouting all over their bodies in an area now where, you know, a camel is necessary to traverse it. And this has happened very rapidly. So in the tropical situation with the high density of species, man utilizes plants and sifts the environment for foods, for medicinals, and for magical plants. And probably for early human beings, this appeared as an almost continuous spectrum. There were merely effects, the prolongation of life and the extensions of it through interacting with the plants. And of course, everything is animate. Earlier, I mentioned the puzzle of how these things came to be known, how they came to be utilized. It's only because we insist on being good 18th century ladies and gentlemen that we pose this puzzle for ourselves and then marvel over it, because there exists in the literature authenticated instances where anthropologists taking hallucinogens with native people have been present when people have discovered alkaloid-containing plants by being told by another plant. And this method of discovery, which is irrational and therefore inadmissible by our cultural conventions is probably the major way in which everything was known up until 500 BC, you know. I mean, these logical and analytical engines by which we place such great store only have come into being really in the last 1,000 years. But before that, we've had our major, perhaps as a species, our major achievements in art, literature, dance, theater, all of these things. So it's a very culturally conventionalized attitude to demand of these things that they behave rationally. The whole enterprise of anthropology, which seeks to set up I don't know what, the second-year graduate student as Cambridge as the 0 point, and then measure all forms of humanity against this with various commentary and adumbration, is a very odd notion. I mean, I think if you're going to do serious anthropology related to saving your own soul through finding out about other people, the first thing you have to do is very carefully examine the cultural conventions of your own society. You sort of have to do a deconstruction meditation on the taboos of your own tribe, because they are many and various, let me assure you. I'm sort of getting my second wind here and recovering from my late arrival and realizing that, we're 2/3 in the wrong way back because I didn't get everything set up and all that. But I should have said at the beginning that you can interrupt at any time with a question. And I'm not entirely clear on who I'm talking to, whether I'm talking to hallucinogen enthusiasts, anthropologists, epidemiologists, psychologists, the police. So maybe at this point, we should let that serve as an introduction and go around the room and let everybody state their concerns, and then I'll pick up the pieces again. Should we do that? Why don't we start here?
Well, I'm interested in the religious aspect that taking some of these drugs have for certain cultures and the effect of in the development of consciousness.
So comparative religious interest. And so you must be interested in shamanism. That's the basis of that. Yeah. Same anthropology, the shamanistic angle on hallucinogens.
Mine is similar. I'm interested in shamanism and what can be revealed through these substances.
Content of the experience. So that's a kind of psychological, phenomenological interest in the situation.
I'm a psychology student and psychedelics and therapy, and I'm really interested in psychedelics' growth, how they use it, and how they conscious, and also if there's any applications for mental illness with psychedelics.
I'm interested in transformation. There being shamanic ways, through pharmacological ways, through whatever that may be, especially the shamanic aspects, and also how that applies psychologically.
I'm interested basically in getting a view of shamanistic practices of South America, especially in ways that they contrast to practices of this continent.
North American Indian shamanism. Interesting.
I'm a dancer and an artist, and I'm interested in the relationship of all of these things.
So practical application.
So primarily interested in imaging, psychedelic imaging,
where that's coming from, either the brain or the plant, or culture, sorting that out.
The source of the experience, what is it?
I'm interested in Swiss psychology. I'm interested in the biological aspects of transformation. So it's anthropology.
Uh-huh.
I'm a psychologist student here, and I lightly explored shamanism, and I'm apprentice of being interested in hallucinogens. And I lived in the Andes for a year and a half, and
Oh, you did?
gone down a piece of the Amazon, but I wasn't into exploring the plant life at that time. I just was into the culture stuff.
Which piece of the Amazon?
The Napo.
Uh-huh. Oh, I know the Napo.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. So did you go from Ecuador down into Peru the whole distance?
No, only really to the kind of the end of the Napo, but only as far as reading coaching.
Oh, on the border. Yeah, that's quite a border. Yeah.
I study political science and political sociology and theoretical interests with a call it the politics of consciousness. That's my theoretical interest. And my personal interest is that enthusiast is the right word of hallucinogens, but interested in exploring. And my prior experience has been primarily in Mexico. Oaxaca. Yeah.
Yes, well, that's one of the richest areas. The two areas where it seems to be concentrated, hallucinogenic shamanism, at least in the present context, is the Amazon basin and central Mexico. Yeah, in the back.
I'm interested in brain, minds, and magic.
He answers the telephone. Well, so everyone must have been pretty bewildered by all that biogeographical. What was it all for? I just want to say one more thing about it. Geography is the visible condensation of time. It is literally all that we have of time. It's somehow, when you have so much of it that you have to pile it up, you get geography. And time is very much what the psychedelic experience is about. It's about the time of your life, the time of the species, but also the time of the stones. And when I delineated us as being caught between geography and language, that's what I wanted to say. Geography is the most condensed and titanic form of time, and language is the most etherealized and present form of time. And, the trick is to realize that in the way that James Joyce must have realized it, because he understood, that speech makes mountains, which is essentially what I'm saying. And I think this is a shamanic idea, the power of speech and the awareness of eternity. These are the two things, because the shaman really does, I think, when you get it out of Bora and out of, these outlandish languages that are not even literate languages, they've only been assigned alphabets for purposes of study. When you get these concepts out of those languages and into some kind of Platonic or Aristotelian or Hegelian or Heideggerian vocabulary, which we can understand, then you see that that's what it's about. It's about standing in eternity. And this is what gives them their superhuman status. So let me talk a little bit about how I view shamanism generally, and then in the context of hallucinogens.
That was one of the things that you want to talk more, hopefully talk more a little bit about the differences. It seems like South America is really two completely distinct regional ecosystems, the Andean plateau, and if you can talk a little bit more about the difference between that and the jungle basin.
Between the montane and the jungle.
And the plant-human interactions.
Right. Probably most of you are familiar with Merceliad's book, Shamanism, the Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. Well, this is the book to read, not because everything it says is true, and in fact I'll delineate my differences with it, but because it represents a compendious phenomenological approach where without judging, the world is surveyed in an ordered fashion, and the case is actually put in perspective so that we can for the first time see that these diverse magico-religious practices and practitioners that exist all over the world at a certain cultural level and have a certain congruence of belief are actually part of a worldwide proto-historical religious system that is in fact probably the foundation of all religions, because once you understand the shamanic complex, it's very easy then to see how later religions like Hinduism, Jainism, all of them arise on a foundation of shamanic motifs, so that and Iliad investigates and delineates the shamanic motifs, and some of them are superhuman ability to handle fire, shamanic flight, ability to cure, which you mentioned, which is the primary social function of the shaman, which really, I think, puts in perspective the fad of shamanism, which has enveloped our culture recently, because our stress largely, though not entirely, is on what the shaman experiences for himself. But in these societies where shamanism is indigenous, it is for the curing. It's almost as though the vision is the private payoff for being able to cure, and this is the function that the shaman is fulfilling. These superhuman abilities, like ability to handle hot metal, ability to find lost objects, ability to foretell weather, ability to cure diseases, are very challenging to Western anthropology, and they always have been, because we can't quite come to grips with it, and there have been various ideas about it. The most promising ones, I think, leaning on the idea that the linguistic context somehow sets you up for how you perceive reality. But in what exactly this linguistic context consists, we haven't really been able to discover. The linguistic context becomes extremely plastic under the influence of hallucinogens, where, in fact, the word can become flesh, almost literally. And we have to remember when talking about what you can do with hallucinogens, that our approach is, when we take them, I think, most of us, largely scientific, which is take the drug, do as little as possible. This is known as not interfering with the experiment, and see what happens. And this is a very useful technique. It's the one that I favor most of the time, because I like my life pretty much the way it is and don't seek titanic transformation. But if you take these things and do things, dance, swing through the trees, expose yourself to wilderness isolation, and that sort of thing, I think it's pretty clear you can fairly quickly reach a place where other people have very little to say to you, because our reality is a linguistic net which holds us all together. And when you leave the net, you become what is conventionally known as crazy, because you become privy to the workings of a reality which is different from other people's. In India, public displays of madness are completely accepted and conventionalized. And even in the Indian situation, people do not withdraw from public life. They live out their altered state in the teeming urban situation. More attractive to me, and I think illustrating my earlier point that all religious systems have a foundation in shamanism, is the ideal of the Taoist sage who lives on cold mountain and cuts wood and carries water and experiments with minerals and plants and fungi and is too odd to talk to, too strange to have anything to do with, and he seems to be privy to a superhuman life that makes his absence from court, his lack of property, his lack of family, his celibacy, all of these things don't bring him down, because he is experiencing this internal reality. It's not clear to what degree Taoism and Taoist shamanism is narcotic. Merciliade, or hallucinogenic. Merciliade uses the word narcotic. One of the places, the major point, in fact, where I differ with him is he believes that all narcotic shamanism is decadent, that the techniques of fasting and ordeal and breath control and the classical, if you will, techniques for invoking visions precede in time narcotic shamanism, so that by the time a culture turns to a drug, even a plant drug, for the hallucinogenic experience, it's past its cultural peak. But I think that this was just based on not carefully thinking it through and formulating your opinion at a very early point in the history of the collection of the data. Because it's now, I think, pretty well established that hallucinogenic drug-based shamanism is the primary shamanism. And that historically, yeah. And that the evolution of these other techniques has to do with the unobtainability for various cultural reasons of the preferred method of induction, which was a drug. We can, if you want to take a microcosmic case, the entire cultural history of India is haunted by the loss of soma. The pinnacle of Indian civilization, the writing of the Rig Vedas, the production of the Rig Vedas, occurred entirely under the influence and in praise of a plant of some kind called soma, which was the good. And whatever it was, as the people who wrote the Vedas invaded India, their cultural context shifted and it became lost and further lost and further lost. And I think it would be very easy to make the case that the endless adumbration of techniques for the invocation of ecstasy and vision state in India has to do with this cultural obsession with the recovery of the soma. And a similar situation can be seen with the case of Amanita muscaria, which has been held up as the paratypical case of narcotic shamanism, basically because it was the first such case studied in depth by Russian anthropologists who around 1910 to 15 went to the Amur district of far eastern Siberia and studied the Tungusic people who were using Amanita muscaria then. And the so-called classical shamanism that Iliad develops and that he measures all shamanic traditions against worldwide is the Siberian model. It is thought of as the proto-shamanism. It has all the elements, all the motifs are present in it. It's somehow or case of the shamanic complex. At least he wants to take it so. Other people have held different opinions. For instance, Gordon Wasson felt that narcotic shamanism was primary, that in fact the chance encounter with hallucinogenic plants in the environment probably was the driving force behind the formulation of religion, that people working their way through an environment testing plants and eating them would eventually come upon a hallucinogen, and the experience would be so tremendous a ingression of novelty into their ordinary experience that they would immediately cultify the source of the experience and surround it with taboos and ritual, and you're off and running. All the elements are present. This may be true. My brother has wanted to go farther and suggest that consciousness itself may be a kind of self-reinforcing feedback loop that has to do with hallucinogens in the environment being encountered by monkeys, who then keep taking them, and as you experience a state, you sort of imprint it. These creodes are laid down, and this is perhaps related to what's called flashback, although I'm not sure that I believe that the flashback phenomenon exists. But I think it is true that you can come to think psychedelically in the absence of psychedelic drugs. If you have used them for years and years and years, it just becomes like a style of being. And I think this style of being in the earliest primates developed into what we call civilization, this style of being, of holding ideas, freely commanding images, accessing material in the past, juxtaposing things in novel situations. These may have originally been forms of mental disequilibration that were meaningless to primates. I mean, what is a monkey to do when suddenly a 2-year-old memory of a hunting situation passes through the mind in a state of disequilibrium and confusion? But of course, we can see that the major thing which has given us a leg up on all other plants and animals on the planet is that we think and we draw conclusions, and from those conclusions we put operational procedures into effect, so that any agent in the environment which would promote the generation of self-reflection would be, it's like evolutionary super fuel or something. It just gives you a tremendous advantage over every other species. Yes?
How do you suggest that this flashback syndrome that people talk about, if you don't believe that it is truly...
Well, it's hard for me to believe, you see, that in adipose tissue you could deposit enough of a drug that then 4 or 5 days later some system would cause it all to release all at once at such a level of concentration that you would have some kind of recurring mini trip. I would like maybe seek not a chemical explanation, not exactly a crude chemical explanation, which is that if you take the drug you might get high again in a few days, but that the experience is so novel that the imprinting of it may have a numinous quality, so that a few days later, in a moment of calm or self-reflection, its numinous quality would allow it to re-emerge quite startlingly in the field of consciousness. That's more my idea of what a flashback must be like. The notion that you would be riding a bus and suddenly realize, my God, I'm getting high on LSD. To me, that sounds slightly pathological, but I'm not sure. All I can say is I've taken lots of drugs, and if it happened to me, I would be quite alarmed.
It has the theory of the flashback has the assumption that the experience is caused by the drug.
Right.
And we have the experience again,
you think, oh, it's the drug again, it's left in my body or whatever.
Right.
Whereas most of us don't believe that the experience is caused by the drug. It's called simply the drug simply releases something that's already there. So once it's been released, it could be released again or it could be released.
That's right.
And so if you flash back, it just means you're reviewing some memory.
Probably if you studied trauma cases with an eye to this phenomenon, you would discover that people who will say have near automobile accidents or something like that, probably 10% of them within 10 days of the experience have go through a jittery, strong memory, a recurrent. Well, you wouldn't say that's the chemistry of the automobile accident, near miss resurfacing. So it may be that all upsetting, unsettling experiences have the quality to recur with startling vividness sometime later. It's just a way of integrating it or something. Yeah.
Is it a matter of the amount of energy that's been taken up in the process of being conscious that's associated with the particular kind of experience that makes that an altered state of consciousness as opposed to regular? Would you want to explain it in those terms? That whatever is experienced under a powerful energy levels will be re-experienced at a certain or retrieved at the same level. So somehow it's classified under that sort of experience.
Right. It's state bounded in a certain way is what you're saying. It's accessible only in the same situation. Perhaps an experience of the an explanation of the flashback thing would be that it's an effort to integrate the material. It's actually like remembering a dream. Just something sets it off. You say, oh, right, last night I had this dream and there was this thing and now it's coming back to me. Well, that's a flashback of some sort. And I believe the orthodox psychoanalytical explanation would be that the compensatory value of the image is being integrated into ego consciousness so this would be a similar situation. Material from the unconscious does have a compensatory role to play if it can be integrated. So it's that kind of thing. So a little bit more about shamanism as a general phenomenon. It relates, and Mircea Eliade again wrote a very interesting book, which very few people seem to have read, called The Forge and the Crucible, which is a study of the relationship of shamanism to alchemy through relating the two figures through the figure of the smith. The smith stands between the shaman and the alchemist because the smith, the early shaman, alchemist, metallurgist, all these things came together because the ability to handle hot objects is related to the ability to smelt and mold metal, which is related to the ability to create. This is the Hephaestos archetype for any classic scholars. This is the notion of the artificer, and the artificer in the classical traditions, the person who makes things is always assisted by demons. This is what it means to make things. Techne is the invocation of demons, not necessarily with a pejorative connotation, but as these familiars, which they make these objects for you. They bring them from the other dimension. It's as though they are the minions from the realm of the ideas. And the smith, shaman, alchemist, working with the fire, which is seen as the interface between this world and the higher world of order, brings these things through. And this bringing through of magical objects and magical information was what the early shaman smith was about. Then very early these two things divided, possibly because the making of metal became associated with the shedding of blood, because it came to mean not the forging of implements for agriculture, but the forging of blades for slaughter. And at that point, these things were divided because there is worldwide the sense that the shaman must be kept from the mundane. The shaman rarely, in war-making societies, the shaman rarely makes war. He's kept back. He has a sacral quality that keeps that from happening.
But it would be about that will helping the food gathering and hunting processes.
That's right. And casting of magic and battle prognostication and all of this.
You can see the enemy coming.
Looking then at narcotic shamanic complexes worldwide, maybe the simplest thing to do would be to survey them briefly and then to talk about the ones that are of particular interest. Starting in the European and Eurasian Arctic, we have, as I mentioned before, this Amanita muscaria cult, which is a very interesting cult to me because it relates to a mushroom, and mushrooms have a role to play that has not yet been fully explicated, even though people like Gordon Wasson and John Allegro and many people have tried to bring it out. But the mushroom shamanic complex appears in two forms in the world. In the Amanita muscaria complex of the Siberian and European Arctic, which is a difficult one. One of the things that's puzzled anthropologists is how hard it is to get high on Amanita muscaria. And, you know, people have published compendious books arguing that it was the original soma and then had to admit that when they took it, it was either inactive or very unpleasant. And so there have been suggestions that perhaps it was prepared in some way, perhaps decarboxylated. The muscarine, which is a poison, can be decarboxylated to muscimol, which is the hallucinogen, through being exposed to milk curds. And in the Vedas, there is a lot of allusions to churning and to it is treated somehow. It's churned with milk and extracted. So perhaps this is the way to do it. Other people claim that the mushrooms have to be roasted, toasted, and that somehow then it's pyrolized, and tryptamine's pyrolized on the surface of the skin, then become active. I've taken Amanita muscaria a couple of times and found it to be to range from ho-hum to fairly disturbing with not too much psychedelic activity. The time that I had the most extreme effects, I took it alone in some woods behind Berkeley, and about an hour into it, the only effect I could see, I'm wearing contact lenses, by the way, the only effect I could see was that my vision was blurring and blurring and blurring and blurring, and I made this calculation about whether I could walk out before I would be completely non-ambulatory. And I did walk out, and it seemed to reach a plateau of this blurred vision thing. And then I laid down on the ground and closed my eyes, and there was some subthreshold hypnagogia, but it was definitely the small potatoes of hallucinogenesis, and perhaps more would have been more effective. But these muscarine, that's a symptom of muscarine poisoning, is the blurred vision. So I knew, you know, I was out into it. It seems that it's highly variable geographically and seasonally. So that, and this we'll find in talking about many of these drugs, is a problem, that knowing how to choose, it isn't often only a matter of the plant, but the plant, the time of year, sometimes the time of day, the growth stage of the plant, the variability, signs which account for the variability, and so on. Continuing to look at the Eurasian landmass, here it is, the largest continental landmass existing in the world today, and it's been throughout man's sojourn in the environment extremely poor in hallucinogens. We could almost say that hallucinogens are absent because you have to really do some concocting to get one together in Europe. European magic, witchcraft, so-called, was largely based on solanaceous plants, which contain tropanes, which are psychoactive, definitely, but debatably hallucinogenic. They are extreme. They are confusatory and extremely unpredictable and very unpleasant. Any of you who've graduated through the Carlos Castaneda books know the respect that was paid to these solanaceous plants, especially in the first book. They are not, I think, an acceptable hallucinogen for someone seeking self-transformation and understanding. They seem to be spooky, tied up on some lower bardo with the projection and manipulation of other people. I've seen people get into very weird places with it. I had a friend once, when I was studying Tibetan in Nepal, I lived in a Nepali village, and there were acres of Datura metalloides, the conspecific species in Asia to metal in the southwest. And he got quite into it. And one day I was shopping for vegetables in the market, and I met him, and we were talking, and he said, perhaps later I'll see you in the market. And I said, we're in the market. And he said, no, we're not. I'm lying down on my bed. We're talking in my apartment. And I realized, this was a severe case of body image dislocation from the linguistic center. And it was typical. I took it a couple of times and found it very strange. The psychological part, which was quite interesting, was you would wait and slowly form the opinion that it was not working. And as long as you kept your attention focused on it, watching for its approach, it would not boil. But no one can do that for very long. Eventually you begin to think, well, should I go get something to eat, or what's happening? And when your attention would shift, you would fall into like a twilight sleep. And what I saw happening was these things, which were ectoplasmic forms, is the only way I can describe them, came into my window, and they were carrying spread sheets like newspapers. And these sheets of newspaper would drift down across my lap, and I would read something which would be so amazing that it would jerk me out of the state. And then I would say, what was that? Something, what was it? I can't remember. It was something. And then it would begin to happen again. And this intensified. And this is typical of European witchcraft. They always say the devil, sorry to say, will come and show you an open book. You will read from an open book. And I was definitely getting this. But then, about 40 minutes after that, these things began happening where I would feel the undeniable urge to tie myself in knots, to throw my arm behind my head and my leg over my shoulder, these very tight things, and which would happen very quickly. And then I would find myself in this situation and very consciously unfold myself and lay back down in my mosquito net and just say, and this happened maybe a dozen times. It was, to me, it felt like a sub-convulsion of some sort. I mean, it was very, and I thought to myself at the time, I'm very glad this is happening to me, because I think this would try somebody else's patience to the uttermost, and it's trying mine. So I think this is the kind of thing that Datura is about. It's very unpredictable, very much about your own physiology, varies from species to species, and there are maybe several dozen worldwide of these highly effective solanaceous plants. You're probably all familiar with Jimson weed, Datura stramonium, which formed the basis of a shamanic religion in Southern California before the conquest, the so-called Tolach religion of the Luiseno Indians of Southern California. And on Santa Catalina, there have been digs that exposed hundreds of these capsules in human graves, these seed capsules of the Datura. And definitely the Nepali sadhus were using this. And in Benares, I would occasionally notice in the gutter a cracked pod of this. So it was an item of commerce. It was happening. The atropine-tropane complex can be balanced using other compounds that occur in European plants. So I think European shamanism, European magic always had this quality of darkness about it because the plants available were so hard to control, and the expulsive quality of some of these solanaceous compounds caused them to have a role in midwifery, which gives the feminine cast to the shamanism of Europe. And really makes it a kind of a unique case. The only exception to what I've been saying in academic understanding of the role of hallucinogens in European history is the Eleusinian mysteries. And probably you're familiar with Albert Hoffman, Karl Ruck, and Gordon Wasson wrote a book called The Road to Eleusis, in which they argue very, very convincingly that the Eleusinian mystery, which was practiced for over 2,000 years at a cult site south of Athens, was in fact an ergot intoxication, that sacred fields of rye maintained there were infected with a strain of Claviceps purpura, which is the smut of rye, that had fortuitously a very high psychedelic alkaloid content and a very low poison content. And a beer, essentially an ergot-contaminated beer, was being prepared and administered. And I think I was very skeptical when I read the book, and it convinced me completely. I just don't think there's any doubt about it, which really is big news, because it means that our roots, our Grecian roots, go right back to a civilization that had as its centerpiece the psychedelic experience. Joe Fontenrose at Berkeley has studied the Delphic oracles, and though there's less evidence there for a cult of hallucinogen taking, it's fairly clear that the Pythia herself, the prophetess of the cult, was intoxicated on some kind of narcotic. Moving slightly south and far deeper into speculation, you come to John Allegro's ideas about early Christianity and its relation to a mushroom. His book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, makes the case that there never was a person named Jesus Christ, that the entire gospel story is a set of very carefully worded religio-political documents that were drafted around AD 70 to hide a cult of mushroom takers. And what they did is they named their sacrament after an imaginary religious reformer who had lived a generation earlier, who was Christ. And I don't think that Allegro's case is nearly as convincing, but his labor of collecting mushroom words in the Old Testament and of showing mushroom cognates from Akkadian and Sumerian and Attic Greek, it represents a tremendous resource for someone else, I think, to take and construct into a tighter case. Yeah.
What about the use of harmaline compounds through the Middle East, North Africa, and Spain?
Well, this is even more speculative than Allegro, because so far as I know, no authority or even presumed authority has ever gone into print to say that it was possible, because there is no evidence of current use. But you're right.
Actually, there's a lot of evidence of current use in Persia. You go to any Sufi house in they have usually 2 or 3 pounds of Syrian root seeds in them laying around.
And what do they do with them?
Very interesting things.
Well, I know in Pakistan it's used basically as a room fumigant, and it has these Ayurvedic uses. It's very suggestive. I mean, I think you see that we're at the beginning of this kind of ethnobotanical archaeology, and that you're very probably right. Syrian rue, for those of you who don't know it, the plant this gentleman mentioned, Pergamon harmala, is the giant Syrian rue, and it occurs from Morocco, basically now probably as far east as Calcutta. And it contains harmine, which is the same alkaloid which is present in the ayahuasca, the major constituent of ayahuasca, which is Banisteriopsis caapi. For years, the constituent of Banisteriopsis caapi was given exotic names like telepethine, banesterine, this and that, until it was finally realized that it was identical to a compound isolated in 1937 by Hochstein and Paradis that was called harmine. Now, several things about this. In South America, the drugs that utilize harmine always do so in combination with another plant which contains DMT. Reports of the activity of harmine on its own are greatly exaggerated. In fact, if you go into the literature, what you discover is it comes down to Claudio Naranjo and one patient, and they described an altered state. It wasn't clear. It was clear that it was psychoactive, but it's not clear that it was hallucinogenic. It seemed to be a kind of enhanced alertness phenomenon. However, this doesn't mean that there couldn't have been a drug prepared in Eurasia that was analogous to ayahuasca in South America. What we have to do is find a DMT plant, a DMT-containing plant that could be combined with the Pergamon harmala to yield a strong hallucinogen. Now, the candidate that I favor is Arundodonax, which is the giant river reed of Asia. Its roots contain DMT in substantial amounts. I have never had the two plants together so that we could actually brew some up and try it. But looking at the published data of the relative concentrations, it looks to me like you should be able to brew a rip-roaring hallucinogen with Arundodonax and Pergamon harmala. Now, it's very suggestive too, because to this day, this plant, Arundodonax in the Arundinaceae, is the preferred source for reeds for musical instruments. All fine reeds are made from Arundodonax, and this suggests a mythological connection. Orpheus, the power of music, the descent into the underworld via the reed. It may be an exoteric symbol of the use of the roots of the reed as a hallucinogen. So, and one last clue, which is among archaeologists, even old-styled archaeologists who know nothing of what I've just said, Pergamon harmala is commonly known as ruin weed. And when you go to Turkey and Anatolia and you're mound hopping, what you look for are patches of Pergamon harmala. It is always found coincident to these mounds that dot Anatolia, southern Turkey, Syria.
There's a couple of other things to consider. That particular reed, if you read Sufi literature for the last 600 years, it's a major metaphor for their state of consciousness. In Rumi's Masnavi and his Tabani Shams, he's constantly going back to reading the sound of the reed.
There's a career to be made revealing the existence of this Pergamon harmala plus reed narcotic. It's very old. I'm convinced that it's real. And there are even other plants that there's even a species of Banisteriopsis argregentum, that has DMT in it, according to the one Indian chemist who analyzed it and reported it. Now, this one Indian chemist has been known to make mistakes, but he did publish data indicating that this Banisteriopsis native to southern India had DMT in it. So this would be a very fertile problem to take up. There are many fertile problems. As we go through these 2 days, again and again, I hope to be able to say, now here's a problem where someone could make a career by